This episode of the Global Manthan Podcast is actually dedicated to the memory of my dadi, my grandmother, who passed away recently into the heavenly abode. Just as the name of this episode, Beacon, she was a beacon of hope, someone you could always rely upon, someone who always had a cheerfulness, a smile on her face, no matter what the outside world was going through. Someone who always asked you first, what do you want to eat? Amidst all the uncertainties, amidst whatever was going on through that day. Someone who people always knew that if you are coming to her, they will always find some positivity, some strength to carry on. Dear Dadi, this podcast, this episode of Global Manthan is in your sweet memory. Hello, namaskar, and welcome to Global Manthan, churning the ocean of knowledge to obtain the nectar of truth. Hello, namaskar, and welcome once again, everyone, to the very second episode of Global Manthan. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest for a very special episode, Professor Dr. Christoph Frei. Professor, welcome to Global Manthan.
Thank you very much for having me.
It is a personal pleasure because Professor Christoph Frei, who has been, now Professor Emeritus at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland for over 25 years, provided his services within this esteemed institution where we are also recording this podcast. It is my personal pleasure because he is someone who I've learned a great deal from. I have been a student of his, and that privilege has been mine. More importantly, he is a mentor, a guru, someone I really look up to, and if I may, a personal friend. So it is a great pleasure to welcome you, Professor. A little bit of an introduction from my side. He is an expert in political science, international relations, has served as the titular professor at the university for many years, also served in the private sector in many capacities. And he's an expert in nuanced concepts such as nuclear proliferation, cybersecurity, schools of international relations, political thought, and philosophy. And there's no one I could think better of being my guest for this very special episode. But as I always ask, how would you introduce yourself, Professor?
Well, first of all, thank you for a most kind and warm introduction, Ritwik. It really is a pleasure being here. Thank you very much for your invitation. Now, how would I introduce myself? Goodness. I think I would say something like, or I will say something like, I'm Swiss. I was born 65 years ago here in Switzerland. Always been privileged throughout my biography in that I was able to do what I liked doing. And I would not say that my career as a teacher here at the university, certainly not like a typical, straightforward kind of academic career. It is the contrary. I got here through circumstances, good luck, a mixture of many, many things. But to make a long biography very, very short, I'm glad I'm here. I was able to, you mentioned it, Ritwik, I was able to teach for 25 years at this university. And boy, it's been a wonderful, wonderful time. And now it's behind me. Yeah, emeritus, retired, formally retired. So looking forward to what's coming, again, enjoying the privilege of reaching that stage of your life in what basically is good health and I would say like curiosity alive and kicking. So how much better does it get? That's why I would consciously use the term or the attribute of privilege.
That is, I mean, I agree on so many things. The only part which was kind of unbelievable for me was when Professor mentioned 65 years, because he definitely does not look like it. That's the youth that he has within himself, that he is also able to connect with each generation of students that pass by here. And I've felt that. I remember the standing ovations you received on so many forums before. I remember the times when I interviewed you for the symposium a few years back, and these memories come fleeting towards me. Why? Because there is a profound impact that a teacher can have on your life, and none have left that impact so profoundly as Professor Frei, and it is definitely that personal pleasure. And I also feel that for this episode, where the focus will be on the youth, there is none better who can grasp that sentiment or the fabric of a young population and what they require, their aspirations, how they would feel, and why it is so important for you and me and for everyone to focus on that young population and kind of allay their concerns to the best of our abilities, because these are, as we will discuss, uncertain times.
Well, wait and hear before you before you raise expectations to that level. Just let's take it step by step and
Definitely.
question by question.
Yeah. So today's episode for all the viewers and listeners is titled Beacon, because we are doing an experimentation of sorts where we talk about these seemingly negative things, or how the media would like to portray them. Negative things such as misinformation, disinformation, and paint a bad picture of all things, so as to see that so many people, especially young people, lose hope in these kind of circumstances. Whereas this is the exact time that a lighthouse or a beacon of hope needs to be shined upon, to show that you can navigate these choppy waters, so to speak. So these seemingly gloomy things that we talk about, our attempt today through this podcast is to recalibrate ourselves towards optimism, to chart a different course for humanity and for the young people who listen to this. Because quite often we fail to look towards that light at the end of the tunnel. Mm-hmm. And this is our way to talk about some inconvenient truths and some convenient lies, and beneath them to uncover and to provide a shining beacon of hope towards the light, especially keeping the young in mind. So, Professor, without further ado, let's begin today's episode.
Let's do it.
My first question to you would be, the youth, is it so affected by whatever is happening around the world? I mean, every person is affected, right? But why are young people most affected? Is it because they are the first to be the tech-savvy generation and sort of the first people to whom the news reaches first through different echo chambers and stuff? And in this ultra-socialized world, are they then the most affected population?
Well, first of all, a question such as the one that you just put on the table, Ritvik, I would hesitate to even pretend that there is a clear, let alone like the one answer. Obviously not. But since you do give me the question, I'll just try to come up with plausible answers. And I think the first one would really relate to the fact of being young. Most generally speaking, we are human. We are not gods. So all of us continuously have to live with that fact. And that is imperfection, frustration, disillusionment, hopes that will not be fulfilled, expectations that will fall short. So in so many ways, like a first aspect is, let's put things in proportion. We are all prone to continuous frustration since we are what we are. Now going on to young people, and there I think, yes, there is a real, like a very strong argument in that the fact of being young implies or entails disillusionment. And why is that? Well, because as a young person, you haven't really seen it all. You haven't really lived it all. You have not experienced it all. So, you come with, let me say, expectations. You come with ideas. You come with imagination, with fantasies, with dreams, if I may. And since you haven't seen it all, and that's the wonderful thing about being young, you're not a cynic yet. You haven't really experienced these things. So why would you then not come with high expectations, have your dreams, and then the disillusionment or the frustration and the fear and the anxiety would then probably be a plausible result of the collision of your expectations on one hand with reality on the other hand. And I don't quite see a way around it because you are young, and that's precisely I should say, the crucial conditioning fact here, that you haven't seen it all yet, which of course, in this context, since we talk about disillusionment, in this context, youth comes with disadvantages. But, should we discuss all the advantages and the wonderful aspect of being young?
Definitely. So you see how even with this first question, even with this first exchange we already know that there are obvious advantages to being young, right? And that's the kind of thing we can focus on, or we can allow young people to focus on, that look, the world is yet there for you to conquer. The world is yet there for you to experience. So by these, of course, what is going on in the world, or what they might perceive, is quite fair upon them, that they can perceive it in a negative way as well. But all hope is definitely not lost exactly by virtue of that age.
Absolutely. So all of this being said, there are probably a few, let's say, more immediate reasons for disillusionment in young people. And, when driving here this morning, the most obvious one that comes to my mind, also looking back at my own life and my own life experience, it is the fact that those whom you look up to, the role models, so to speak, above all, of course, your parents, your siblings, the people around you, one aspect of being young and then, growing into life is, of course, that you realize, even my pop, even my mom may not be perfect. Yes. Or such and such, my favorite sibling, my oldest brother, such a wonderful person, but what is he doing now? How could he say or do such a thing? And of course, you go on into school where this or that teacher may be like a role model, and all of a sudden, or gradually you realize, he's human too, after all. Yep. So that's one other very obvious kind of accounting for disillusionment, in that you come with expectations or you come with hopes. I mean, who would not hope for a role model that meets your expectations, that would live up to your expectations? But definitely. Again, and I guess I've mentioned it, we're not gods. We're just human.
To err is to human.
Absolutely.
And, to give a bit of a context to the viewers and the listeners here, the reason for this podcast, and actually the tentative title that we had discussed before, was how do I make sense of it all? So the audience, or let's say the target group of this, was definitely the youth, right? And the idea for this came because I saw some clips, and I see and I read and I observe different media forums, different digital mediums and print media. And I saw the one thing that was common these days is that young people, because of their ability to grasp information and also disseminate information, to give and take, I see so many young people from the ages 16 to 25, I would say, fighting a lot. Fighting with the hopes or with despair in their minds. And when that is the next generation that I see that, okay, these were the ones who we owe a duty towards, because they have not fully seen and fully developed their mindset yet. They are like, the clay, the wet clay, and it is upon us, who are the next generation, a few generations removed from them, not only in age but also in terms of experience, that we can shape that wet clay into something beautiful if we give an effort towards. And so why? Because throughout what we are hearing in terms of politics, in terms of these wars that erupt out of nowhere, this sort of economic uncertainties leading to inflation, unemployment. These are very heavy topics for a young mind to grasp and to even think about. And yet they are definitely somehow affected towards it. So to separate the irrelevant stuff from the relevant, and to kind of allay that disillusionment, that disconcertment, was the idea behind this.
I would, when I listen to you, Ritwik, let me try to frustrate you a little. When I hear you talk about the heavy stuff, the wars, the economic uncertainty, the unemployment, the lack of prospects or perspectives, and so forth. But when I hear you, let me just make a very bold statement, but let me make it with lots of conviction, inner conviction. I really believe that what I say I can corroborate what I say. I can support it. The times that we live in, those are not really, the bad times at all. In so many ways, the time we're living in is much better than what we used to have. And so, I guess the implication here is disillusionment may not really be due to the very misery around us, because we live longer. There is less extreme poverty in the world. We have fewer wars than we used to have, even though many of us may think, it's terrible, look at all the wars. Historically speaking, we live in rather peaceful times. We have very few interstate wars between nations. It's the exception, not the rule. So what I'm trying to say, if there is frustration, anxiety, disillusionment, it may have to do with our expectations that are higher at this time than in earlier times. It may not be due to the misery and objective misery around us. So what I'm saying is, look, this world ain't that bad. It's not that bad. But that doesn't mean that on the subjective level, individually, many of us and many young people do live with fear, anxiety, uncertainty. Only I'm trying to put it in proportion. The times, go back 60 years. 2/3 of humanity were living in abject, extreme poverty. Now the numbers are down to perhaps 10%, less than 10% of abject poverty, World Bank numbers.
Yep.
Look at wars, look at, look at colonialism, look at, look at the, let's say, so many ugly sides of humanity, so many ugly aspects. So again, I really mean it when I say the times that we live in may not be much worse than what we had in previous times. Actually, we live longer, life expectation. In so many ways, things have become better. I don't die of a bad tooth. 100 years ago, I would die of a bad tooth because we had no penicillin or we had no medication and so forth.
I do
so,
see.
And I will stop. I know I've been too long.
I just wanted to.
Let me just say, we probably need to really be careful as to what we mean when we talk about the reasons for, where is the disillusionment come from?
Yeah.
And there, of course, there are wonderful or very plausible reasons of why today's youth does have reasons to, be less optimistic and feel more anxiety. But they may not be due to the objective environment.
That's true. The reason why I wanted to interject in between was I agree with what you said. However, let's say, and this is sort of like a pushback, if I may, isn't the whole point of progressing as a humanity, as a civilization, that things improve from the past, right? So let's say, yes, I acknowledge the fact that these are not as bad times as they were 60, 70 years ago, or even before, when people, like you said, were living in abject poverty. They were, there were world wars. There was a nuclear, there were nuclear disasters, and we don't even need to go 60, 70 years. It's like 40 years ago from now. I acknowledge that. But isn't the fact that because we have progressed a lot as a humanity, we have been in relative peace for many, many years now, that our expectations naturally become higher. And therefore, this kind of uncertainty and this kind of situations that we see, or the young people see, they have a right to, be a little bit angry or be a bit concerned about.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if we can acknowledge the fact that, yes, these are much better times than before.
Well, you're right on target. Look, for example, in this region here of the world, in Europe, good old Europe, we've had peace and prosperity in many parts of Europe for so long now. Small wonder that expectations, go along and keep rising.
Yep.
But, and again, history helps. History does not repeat, as we know, but it often rhymes. And so, when we do go back, the very idea that things get better and better, the very idea that we have progress, that, that what Reinhold Niebuhr used to call historical optimism, roughly 100 years ago, in his wonderful, truly rich books, Protestant Theologian in the United States of America, Reinhold Niebuhr. So, historical optimism in itself has not always been with us. These are very recent ideas. And if I had to, find like an origin of these ideas, you go back perhaps 400 years, but that's that. Before that, humanity used to live, first of all, in small groups, and then in cycles. The idea of linear progress, that things are getting better and better, that in itself is a very recent idea. It's only just a few hundred years. Prior to that, we didn't have the technologies. We didn't have the rational enlightenment kind of cognitive or philosophical movement that would basically propel us into modernity. So, as you said, Ritwik, when you live well, when you have peace, when you grow up in prosperity, let's say in material prosperity, then of course your expectations will go along, and this is embedded in a larger secular movement that began like 300 years ago with what we call modern liberal philosophy, with the idea that there is linear progress and it's getting better and better. And I guess in so many ways what we see today is the limits of that philosophy. The fact that we may not actually continue to rise and to progress. No, we may in fact have reached a point where in so many ways there may be regression. And I guess that's kind of a sneaky suspicion that runs up your spine, and you don't have to be young in this context.
Absolutely.
Because I'm 65, and believe me, it does not leave me untouched.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you already asked the question which I would have asked, because when we were mentioning what causes disillusionment, right? So to repeat that, what you just said, what can cause disillusionment or sort of, how do you say, among the young people? As in, because I've heard from so many people that I've interacted over the past 3-4 years and during my master's studies and even before when I started working after my undergraduate degree that, oh, I don't like politics. I'm so far removed away from that pacifism, that kind of, because when we talk about the so-called bad times, 60, 70 years ago, and okay, not so-called, but they were really uncertain times, the young people, that is our grandparent generation, they really fought it out and they were taking agency into their hands to do things about, to do something about things. Whereas what you find with a lot of young people now is that they either do, a majority is not so interested in taking that agency, or maybe we haven't given them the right platform and the right environment to do so. So what causes disillusionment? And do you agree or disagree with that agency and that taking matters into your own hands kind of situation?
What would you have if you sit by the table and the plate is full, and the same goes for the glass, a good red wine? What agency for what if the plate is full? And I really mean it. You know, when you mention your parents, your grandparents, goodness gracious, my grandparents really, not in a poverty of the metaphysical kind. They were rather happy. But as my mom always used to say, we were very poor, but healthily so. We were healthy, but in huge poverty. So agency is required when you don't even have the means, for survival. Agency is required in terms of work, effort, every single day throughout the year. You have to keep working, basically cultivating the soil on which you live to make a living and be able to go forward and to sustain yourselves. Now, look at today's world, and this, of course, is this is not like a reproach to the young generation. It's only just a fact that they sit by the table and the plate has been full routinely. So what I'm saying is that hunger or that, innate drive to better your condition. Adam Smith would always say, if there is one thing in all of us that is just universal, it is that drive to better my condition at all times. But Ritwik, cross your heart, if you look into Switzerland in the 21st century, what kind of betterment do you want? You have so many things, even for free, digitally, streaming, Netflix. There is an abundance of supply in so many ways. So again, expectations are high, obviously, but agency for what? Where does the hunger or the drive come from when you know full well that you're going to inherit from your parents or from your grandparents, and you will basically, existentially speaking, you will be fine. So you have this, ocean of freedom of choice. And I obviously exaggerate, but I think in terms of the proportions, it's not so wrong to compare this abundance of supply in so many ways with the scarcity of goods and resources some 60, 70, 80 years ago.
I see that point. And two things. First, the parallel that I will also give an example, not because you mentioned Switzerland and your family, your grandparents, and I will give you an example, similar one, because this is important, this parallel, that 60, 70 odd years ago, similar situation was with my grandfather, and I know that story. India was just independent from the British, and I'm talking about the 50s and 60s when he grew up. He worked from a very young age. When he was 7-8 years old, accompanying his father, who was working in a cotton mill in one of the states in northern India, and he used to earn a little bit. I can't even quantify that to give you a reference, but it was very little. But that little money was enough for him to, because he lost his mother quite early, in a very early childhood, and he had very young siblings. So feeding his siblings was a responsibility of his at 7-8 years old. So we talk about hard times now. This is unheard of, right? So similar, but again, like you mentioned, the family, they were happy in a different way. They were living in real poverty, things which we can't even think about because, and I will acknowledge myself, I kind of grew up with a silver spoon in my mouth in that, if I compare to that, right? But happiness quotient, or let's say that drive, that agency, that motivation to do something was so natural and inherent in him from that very young age that he didn't have time to think about whether he is unhappy or not, because he was just motivated to go forwards. That was the only way.
Absolutely. And, you don't have to be a cynic so as to say your father at that time, they were, in some ways, they were free. Freedom there was, but freedom was embedded in a huge challenge, and to basically make your life within that, in that environment. But it was always embedded in responsibility, obligation, work. You had to basically deserve or show yourself like worthy of the freedom, and now compare with a prosperous, in many ways spoiled, a time and generations spoiled with peace and prosperity. Again, not because people are bad. No, it's just fortunate in so many ways to be prosperous and live in peaceful times. But where is the responsibility? Yeah. Where is that, that the burden of freedom, in so many ways, in that you have to make a life, and you have to basically meet the challenges. And so obviously young people today also have to meet many, many challenges, Ritwik. Only I observe that the challenges are less in the material realm of life and more in the metaphysical realm of life. Orientation. What's the sense of it all? What am I doing here? What's the purpose of my life? And so in the I should say challenging old times, you didn't have as much time to wonder about the purpose and the meaning, because you had to meet the everyday challenge, along with the group, the family, and so forth.
Survival.
Today you have all the metaphysical kinds of questions. Why? Because materially speaking, you're quite safe. Existentially speaking, at least you feel like I won't be hungry. We haven't seen hunger and experienced hunger in these regions of the world. Some margin, one might say, there is quite a difference between, or in between those different eras.
Yeah. Yes. The other thing that I was going to mention is that even when we speak, there's a little bit of acknowledgement that I have to do of the fact that what you and I are talking about is the young generation in, let's say, not only Western Europe, Switzerland, or let's say certain classes of India, but I have to acknowledge, because I come from India, a country which has a lot of disparities in income, that abject materialistic poverty is still prevalent in some parts of the world. I mean, there was a statistic that I wanted to bring up. Maybe I'll put it up for the viewers when when this is being edited, that yes, what you said is absolutely true. World Bank data shows that unemployment, poverty levels are at a historic low, even after COVID pandemic, even after everything. However, the disparities, or let's say the graph, or how it shows for lower income countries, is still down. And so, just for an acknowledgement that what we are talking about is not true for all young people across the world, but what we are talking about is a generalist statement, or let's say, the audience who will listen to this needs to know both the pictures.
Absolutely. I'm glad you bring it up, or I'm glad you compliment the picture. But again, there are huge differences. Obviously, today there are differences between regions and within societies between, let's just call it rich and poor. Of course, these differences are still there. But let me still kind of draw your attention to another aspect, and that is the... now I lost my thread a little, doesn't matter. It will come back, and I may bring it later on. I was going to say something about, does it come back to me now, or have I lost my thread? Again, a comparison in terms of where we are today, the young people, and the expectations that they may have. And now it comes back. Thank you so much for your patience, Ritwik. What I want to say is this. Even the poor segments of the populations, and as you say, and rightly, recall, yes, in many societies we still have, poor segments, less favored segments of the population. There is one huge difference between poverty today and poverty back then, and that is that poor people today know exactly how it looks to have or not be poor. Thanks to or due to the coverage with modern electronic media, with also social media, down to Instagram, people know how everybody lives in the more affluent regions of the world.
Definitely, yeah.
Some 60 years ago, people in many societies didn't quite have an idea of what it was, how life was in the more affluent areas. Nowadays, this information, and that brings us back to the disillusionment, anxiety, and unhappiness. Your expectations will be modified when you see what the good life looks like. Definitely. When young girls see how, women live in such and such city or country. Yep. So what I'm saying is, yes, in so many ways we need to put it all in proportion, but at the same time we also need to acknowledge, I feel, that there are stark differences even in the quality of being poor, because today everybody knows how the well-to-do people live, what kind of luxuries they can afford, if only luxuries in terms of having what you might consider like simple material things, but everybody knows it. It's there because everybody has a smartphone. So today, the phenomenon of rising expectations is all the more prevalent because everybody knows how, let's say, good life could look like.
Yeah, so the effects are exacerbated precisely because of that visibility of not being poor and versus being poor. When you mentioned this, there is this one particular scene from an Indian Bollywood movie that comes to my mind. It was very famous, actually. The movie's name is Gully Boy, and it's the story of a wannabe rapper who grows up in one of the poorest slum neighborhoods in Mumbai, Dharavi. It's the world's biggest slum. He grows up there, and he also moonlights as a chauffeur for a very wealthy family in Mumbai, and that's like a classic disparity. So he himself, he's listening to the daughter of his master, of his employer, and she's cribbing about, she got dumped by a boyfriend, and, the life is so hard for her, and she's crying, breaking down. And this guy is thinking to himself, driving the car, and it's very beautifully captured by the movie, that he has an alcoholic father who routinely is, abusive towards his mother. He's living in that really atrocious home. He literally has to work both in the morning until very midnight as a driver. he has a passion that is rapping, freestyle rapping. He wants to fulfill it. So for that, he's using whatever money he gets left off. And he's drawing the parallels, that the difference between the disillusionments. And so it really, what you said is bang on. I mean, I can't agree more. Coming back to my question and sort of moving this discussion a little bit ahead, what are the major causes of concern for you as well, and what you think really does affect the young people today?
That would probably turn into a long list, like answering in bits and pieces. Mm-hmm. I think one huge concern is what I would label the loss of truth, the loss of shared facts, the loss of also like a sense of orientation that's just gone. And what do I mean by that? One way, and that also used to be a check on expectations in earlier times, is of course religious truth, religious belief, religion as a corrective to the dreams and aspirations of men or of mankind. So in so many places around the world today, we do live in secular times. Obviously not everywhere. I'm not saying that religion is gone. Yeah. Only I'm saying that in some places, some societies, some countries, religion has lost its, let's say, its function of being a constant check on expectations by putting things in proportion. We are human, not gods, right? Mm-hmm. Just to make that plain statement again. So that's one thing. Another thing relating to the loss of truth, and I don't want to be naive, truth has always been contested. Mm-hmm. But again, in historical comparison, we now live in a time where there ain't no such thing. There is no more shared sense of orientation building on shared assumptions about the world and building about shared truths, right? Things that you don't question. So where is this coming from? One is secularization, the ebbing away of religion as an innermost corrective within individuals. Mm-hmm. But another one, of course, is the loss of what I would say, the loss of the public space, the square, the agora, where people meet and talk. In the open society, we still live by the ideal that arguments meet in the public sphere, in the public debate, in a parliament, but also in the press, the media. And here it comes, Ritwik. Mm-hmm. Public space has dislocated from media. A few gatekeepers, such as great newspapers and so forth, has dislocated into the internet. Mm. The public space is now taking place, and it's in the digital world, it's in the virtual world, and there it's fragmented to such an extent that we barely have truths or assumptions that we all share. And as far as I'm concerned, that is a huge reason for me to worry, because what happens if in an open society we have freedom, but we lose the ability to communicate with each other because we lose even shared facts. Yeah, if the American president tells me that it was Ukraine, as the aggressor, and that it was all Zelensky's fault, well, then I'm at loss to even discuss, because it's just not the way I am supposed to look at it. And this is just one stark example. If the American president starts rebuilding the world about different assumptions, about different truths, where does it leave us? But to come back to your question, social media, digitization or digitalization, all of these phenomena, technological progress has led us into a world in which we find it very hard to even communicate because we lose a common or a shared framework.
Ground rules, basically.
Exactly.
Something which was, in your opinion, much more pronounced many years ago? Or let's say there was a shared sense of, okay, this is something we all agree on as a baseline, whether it was through, in different societies, that religious dedication, the faith that was there, or was it also because of the fact that people came out of different difficult situations and they were like, okay, let's not go back there. Whereas now we have sort of an amnesia or a sort of gap between those really bad times, coming back to what we said.
I think we don't even have to go into these like experiences as truth. I think we can just look at the structure of the public sphere. Let's go back into the 60s, 70s, 80s. You had, let's take this, this little biotope that we call Helvetistan or Switzerland. You had a few newspapers, and that was that. Of course, you had many newspapers, but only a few were like the leading newspapers. And in so many ways, Ritwik, those were gatekeepers for public discussion. Only what made it into those newspapers would be part of the public discussion. And all the members of parliament would read those media. Globally speaking, think of the New York Times, think of Le Monde in Paris, think of Financial Times in London, think of Frankfurter Allgemeine, Süddeutsche Zeitung, and so forth in Germany. Now, where are the gatekeepers today? They may still exist, but who, Ritwik, is leading the Neue Zürcher Zeitung today? A small minority. Who is still reading the New York Times? Small minorities of the US American people. Most of these people, don't read dailies any longer. So the gatekeepers are gone. What makes it into the public realm? What makes it into the public sphere? Myriads of messages on social media, but going unchecked. Whoever wants to enter the digital space can basically do so today, thanks to what we call technological instruments and tools that are in place.
Sort of to break the fourth wall now here. This medium, what we are doing right now, is one of the most popular mediums of information, podcasting. People listen to, if I may name drop, the Joe Rogan podcast in the US much more than they read the New York Times, as you said, right? Part of what I'm doing here and what I told you about the title, Global Manthan, the churning, is that you hold one end of the spectrum, I hold the other. So I'm not disagreeing with you when I ask some certain opposite questions or I put an opposite point of view. That's just part of what we do here on this podcast. Let me get back to you on one aspect then. Isn't the fact that digitization has led to a situation where people find it much more easier to listen or to watch convenient short videos or reels or listen to these podcasts while they're driving, cooking, whatever, then they would find time to read print media as they used to in the past, right? And they were the gatekeepers, yes. And I agree to you on the extent that gatekeeping situation does not exist today. But that erosion has taken place over time. It has not happened overnight. And we just have to accept the fact that these new forms of media are going to be there for a while now. So what you would suggest is that there should be some accountability for these platforms then as well.
Look, I don't even have a solution, but I'm pretty certain, or I feel pretty certain about my analysis. What I'm saying is, and I agree with everything you say, this has not come overnight. All I'm saying is, with the diffusion of technology across the world, there is something like a democratization of the public sphere. And that in itself is a wonderful thing. Only, Ritwik, and here it comes, and that's the core of the analysis here. How do we then form a political will in a society if we have such a fragmented space that is online, echo chambers? And even if, yes, you know what's going on in the other echo chamber, that's not so difficult, but how do you communicate when you don't even agree on very basic facts any longer? And I think in so many ways, I'm afraid, really in many ways, I am afraid that we live through the last years of shared, accepted, basic assumptions about so many things, including history. Historians will hopefully prove me wrong, and they will find ways to secure, let's say, a factual account of history writ large. Only what I see today, and I see it within my own family in the larger sense of the term, all my tribe, la tribu. If I look at my own folks, we find it hard to agree on many, many things. Why? Because of the democratization of public opinion, the democratization of the instruments of access. It is great to see that civil society can access, so many technologies and be part of it. But Ritwik, has it really made us, has it really made it easier to then form like a political will in a society? It used to be the parliament deliberating and then just making a decision, and then you had a political will. La volonté générale, Rousseau would have said, or even in an assembly of grown-up citizens. Ritwik, where is the assembly today? Where is the agora? Where do we meet, exchange, and form a political will for a society, for a country? And I guess that's precisely one of the huge challenges today. What we see is strong men and weak institutions, strong men imposing their own will and calling it democracy.
Yeah. Because the power, we talk about echo chambers, we talk about diffusion of public spaces, or rather the disintegration of public spaces. But one thing that has remained constant, which you just pointed out, is that the power has always been consolidated. The power always has stayed in that one office, at that one desk, right? In all democratic setups of across the world. So what has changed is that our ability, or let's say the check or that light to that desk or that stage of power has become fragmented. Those checks and balances have really dissolved, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So that's the difference then.
You may as well say, and this is a question that we can just put on the table without having a definitive answer to it. What happened to the democratic institutions of the rule of law, separation of powers, basic individual rights? I mean, all of these things are still there conceptually, but the institutions supporting these, let me call them inventions against the abuse of power. Those were all like securities that we put in place to safeguard political systems from the abuse of power. Donald Trump may try to concentrate executive power at the cost or at the expense of the judicial branch and Congress, legislative branch. But again, the huge challenge today is that what used to really work pretty fine in the 19th century and 20th century is really challenged in so many ways by new technologies, because everybody is part of the game. And so the institutions that we have in place find it it is more and more difficult for these institutions to functionally still produce la volonté générale, the will of the Commonwealth, or the will of the people. What is the will of the people when the people don't agree on very basic assumptions any longer?
This actually provides a great way to move this conversation forward, right? Because I'm also, and this is now we move on towards the beacon section of this conversation, right? Where do we find positivity, even despite the fact that we acknowledge that, okay, these are not that bad times, but there is definitely an erosion of public space. There is definitely a lot that can be improved so that the society or the ways of checking up to power does not dissolve further, right? My question to you now, what has historically been a solution to these kind of uncertainties? What can be learned from a previous generation, for example? Three things come to my mind. The solution, is it to wait it out, which sounds really bad and very passive? Is the solution to fight, a form of active resistance? Or is it to be complicit in the crime, or to have that kind of agreement that, okay, we cannot do it, so we might as well become part of whatever is going wrong? Kind of offering you so many different forays, right? That's my question.
Oh, that's also one of those easy ones, right? A very easy question. Now it's so hard. To begin with the last option, obviously not an option.
Yeah.
Neither for me as an individual, as a citizen, as a taxpayer, but also not an option for me as a mentor, tutor, teacher. How do you want to sell cynicism in a classroom? We don't want to. Yeah. We must not. We have a responsibility to find ways to still, at least believe in the very option that we can make a difference in a good way. Mm-hmm. So what was the second one? The third one was, to basically go along, be accomplice.
Yeah.
The second one, accomplice, being cynic and basically agreeing to the fact that we can't change it. So let's just, après nous, après moi le déluge, let's just enjoy it as best we can. And afterwards, it's going to go down the drain anyways. Not an option at all. The second option, active resistance, I like that much better. Mm-hmm. Why? Mm-hmm. Because responsibility is either individual or it is not. And if responsibility is an individual thing, so to speak, well, I better try to be responsible and do what I can do. In good old the principle of subsidiarity. Look, I'm not president. I'm not a federal councillor. I'm not even a member of parliament. I'm only just a citizen in my spot, at my place, with the limited abilities and resources that I have. But with what I have, I definitely want to try to stem whatever tide I see that goes in the wrong direction. I want to keep, keep in my position, keep spreading the kind of insights that I have gathered, and keep explaining the world as best I can to the people who are, for example, in my classroom. That's what I can do. And is that resistance? No, I guess it's just trying to behave responsibly and make the best, of your own life. Give it a meaning and give it a purpose. And then again, individually speaking, my purpose would then be to go on working and to believe that we can still make this world a better place by persisting, sticking to those things that worked in the past. And I think there are many, many things that have worked very, very well so far. Mm-hmm. Why would we throw them overboard just because strong men at this time try to convince us that these precepts and institutions don't work? No, they did work. And we have to, as far as I'm concerned, find back to those, but also try to adjust them to where we are today. For example, what are the rules of public debate? What are the fundaments on which we can build exchange and dialogue? Because we have to find back to a meaningful exchange. So that's just one example, which basically means what are, the rules and regulations within the public sphere, the public debate. If we can't agree, we are lost. We will be lost in the long run. We have to find ways and means, and that's just one example. And let me call it active resistance, if you wish, where you try to at least make a difference in that little space that you can cultivate. That Voltaire would have said, cultivate your own garden. We all have to, I cannot cultivate heaven. So, but I can take care of my own garden and do whatever I can do.
And one step or one person or one society at a time, that's how you lead to a bigger difference then.
Piecemeal progress, not giant leaps, not giant leaps, but piecemeal step by step.
And that's what you would say the previous generations had kind of figured it out?
They had to. They had no choice. Mm-hmm. They were born into a Europe that was destroyed after World War II, to just begin again at the European end because we are here. So when you're born into basically rubble, Munich, all of these German cities, it was just rubble, stone, ashes. They had to rebuild the world, but forgive me for saying so. It's perhaps easier then because you know exactly what you need to do. There is absolutely no choice. Today, we live in peace and prosperity, but we have perhaps a multitude of choices, and the challenge is overwhelming for us because we have too much choice.
Problems of abundance, just how we began this podcast with, right? We're moving towards the latter end now, perhaps towards the end of this episode. And you mentioned, some philosophers, Voltaire, Rousseau. One particular quote from a biography of Abe Lincoln comes to my mind. Abraham Lincoln was once, and this is beautiful because this is a conversation which was happening during the Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. There was a telegrapher, a radio operator, very young, a young conscript brought into the throes of the military. And Abe Lincoln is sitting. He wants to wire a message to Ulysses S. Grant, his general. And they're having this discussion at the later ends of the night. Abe Lincoln is not only thinking about how to win the war or win that battle, but he's also thinking about why the battle is being fought. For justice, for the abolition of poverty, or for the abolition of slavery. And he asks this young conscript, this young radio operator, he asks, "Son, do you think we are born into the right times? Are we fitted into the times we're born into?" And this young man looks at him and he says, "Well, I don't know about myself, but you surely are." Thinking about those kind of messages, those kind of conversations, and I would ask you now, do you think that we are a product of our times, or we can shape our times to be better?
I don't know whether we can, but I'm pretty darn sure that we have to try. Because if we stop trying, then we just leave the field or the garden to those who will. And that cannot be the resolution of our problems, or that cannot be the solution to the problems that we're confronted with. Again, all of us who still have, and also all of us, in order to preserve hope and in order to believe in something, we need to keep trying and not leave that proverbial field to those who will otherwise make all the decisions, call all the shots, pull the strings, and basically create the world that nobody wants, or that few people want. And these, of course, Ritwik, and I hope it's not, sounding too arrogant, but nothing of this is new, really. Nothing of this is new. Yep. Men have always been striving for power. And as it may sound absurd, but yes, while we are altruistic, while we have so many good capacities and good sides and aspects to human nature, but while or as long as we don't really change fundamentally in our setup, the way we're hardwired, so to speak, we just have to reckon with men who seek power as well. Not everybody is an angel, and most of us definitely are certainly not. I'm definitely not an angel.
Same.
So, keep, bloody hell, there is, or not bloody hell, but, a humane world. If you want to build turn the world into a humane place.
Yes.
We have to keep trying to prevent the abuse of power. And in that regard, I think we have developed some pretty good safety walls or securities that we need to cultivate and really make sure they don't go away. Checks and balances. Mm-hmm. Yeah, ambition needs to meet ambition. Yeah. The rule of law, not the rule of man, and so forth. So there are a few precepts that have worked pretty well, and just because some are trying to convince us that they're not working any longer, those of us who believe in still keeping this a good place, making the world a better place, those of us who believe in this, let's not ever be idle, but let's just keep working, even though it may be the work of Sisyphus. You may not ever make it there. We all thought we had made it after the Cold War. We all thought that history would come to an end and end up in liberal democracy. And we were wrong. Yeah. We were wrong. And perhaps one last idea or one last sentence as a professor and a teacher, humility. Look, for decades we used the concept of governance and sold it to our students. Many of us would not even speak of power any longer because, rules and regulations would regulate, turn the jungle into a zoo. Ritwik, we were wrong. Power is still here. And if we want to prepare or turn young people into the leaders of tomorrow, we must, whether we like it or not, we must also speak of power and not just of rules and regulations.
Last final question, and before that, and one thing that has really stayed with me, I asked you this a couple of years ago at the symposium. I asked you a question: what do you think is leadership today? What does it lack? And you said, and I quote, that a lot of leaders today pander to their vote banks and they cater to the public opinion. They do not drive and they do not attempt to change public opinion. That has stayed with me and probably will stay with me forever. And now through this medium is on record. Do you agree with that still?
Absolutely.
And one final message from our very special guest to a young audience who might be listening to this. What would that be?
Oh, I don't have famous last words.
We have to shine a beacon, remember, Professor?
Yeah, but I would just basically confirm that, yes, of course, unfortunately, I still stick to what I said 2 years ago in that leaders should lead, Ritwik. And leaders should not look at opinion polls and try to be popular. And that is one huge element of discontent and frustration way beyond young people. And that is the feeling, the very unpleasant feeling or the very unpleasant impression and perception that our leaders quite often do not tell us what's going on. They try to lure us into some complacency and everything is going all right. No, everything is not going all right if we do not move, if we do not adjust, if we do not keep working on our institutions, on ourselves, civil society, and so forth. So, unfortunately, leaders tend to not be leaders. Alleged leaders tend to not lead. And so, perhaps one of those famous last words is resist. If you find those leaders, well, don't give them your vote. So, and don't elect them, but make sure we get leaders who try better. And that is also a very, very eminently human condition. We will always fail, but we will always stand up and try and fail again, but fail better.
Beautiful. I couldn't think of a better quote to end and a better note to end upon. Professor Frei, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being such a wonderful guest. And I'm sure we will see you once again on the Global Manthan Podcast at a mutually convenient date. He will be a great friend of this show. So stay tuned.
Thank you very, very much again for having me. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. So today, in episode 2 of Global Manthan Podcast, we talked about some very deep philosophical questions about what causes disillusionment among young people, what are the ways in which we can allay some of those concerns, because it is very crucial for the youth, for the young people to stay grounded, to stay humble, to always stay focused on what is their responsibility. In the words of John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And that applies not only in a country specific context, but in the society as general. As Professor Frei said, one step at a time, one garden at a time, and we are sure that we will turn that collective garden of society into something very bright and beautiful. So this was our attempt at shining a beacon of light, a beacon of hope through these seemingly dark clouds, so that you can stay optimistic, positive through even the toughest of times. Stay tuned to Global Manthan, churning the ocean of knowledge to obtain the nectar of truth.